First, I want to talk about losing. Now, none of you wants to lose, I presume. It's a bad thing. We generally don't like to lose. So I'm going to ask you a question. You have a kind stranger who walks up to you and says, hey, I'm going to give you two things. You can have $45 in cash right now, or I'm going to flip a coin, and if you win the coin flip, if you get heads, I'm going to give you $100. If you get tails, I'm going to give you nothing. So that's your choice. Now, who of you would prefer the $45 in cash? Please raise your hands. Cool, awesome. Who would prefer the coin flip? Oh, I love this. This is perfect. This actually aligns perfectly well. I like this straw poll. I talk to HR audiences often. And what I do is I get 80 to 85% of HR audiences prefer the $45 in cash. Now, so this is just something that I've seen. So you're right on with the other HR audiences, like around the country. And I haven't done this around the world as much, so I don't have as much of a baseline. So you have, when I was first presented with this problem in graduate school by my mentor, I also chose the $45 in cash. It's like, okay, solid amount of money, right there, good stuff, right? And he told me that, well, most people in studies, not simply HR professionals, most people in studies also prefer $45 in cash. So that's their preference when they're asked what they choose. But what I didn't realize and what they don't realize is that in the long term, this choice causes them to lose. It causes them to be a loser. Why is that? Well, if you think about it, the $45 in cash, that's $45. The 50% chance, the coin flip of winning $100 is the equivalent to $50. So over the long term, you have 45, 45, 45, 45, guaranteed 45. That's going to give you 270. If you have, that's going to give you 45, 45, what is 90? 180. Now, if you have the coin flip, over time, you'll get the $200. So once you lose, once you win, once you lose, once you win, 50% chance, right? And I told him, hey, you presented this as a one-off. If you presented this as a repeating scenario, I might have thought about this differently. So what gives? And what he told me was that we tend to perceive everything as a one-off. Our gut reaction tends to perceive all life choices as a one-off situation. As a result of perceiving each situation as a one-off, we make choices to avoid losses. We don't want to lose the $45 in cash, and so the 50% chance, it's kind of like, well, I don't know if I'll win or not, who knows, right? And so we tend to prefer things that cause us to avoid losses. It's a very natural evolutionary dynamic. In the evolutionary environment, we couldn't save resources. No matter how big of a bison you killed, you can't carry all that meat before droughts, right? You can't put it in your bank account. You didn't have a fridge. So you had no way of preserving these resources. So that's one dynamic that's going on. And so if you gave up resources, you were much more likely to die if you took a risk. Whereas obviously in the current environment, you're not going to die if you make this choice. But it feels like it. That's the fight or flight response. That's one dynamic. The other one is long-term stability. So that's the second one. In the ancestral environment, we didn't have long-term stability. It was better to preserve short-term resources. We can't bank on the long term. Whereas here, you put your money in the bank, it's insured up to whatever it is, $1 million, I think. So by the federal government, you can bank on the long term. So these two dynamics cause us to make really bad choices in trying to avert losses. And you could see it intuitively on your bank account. Now, let's say you have a salary of $50,000. Let's just go with that. And 45 versus 50 is a difference of 10%. Now, if the difference of 10%, if you fall into loss aversion in your salary, means that you'll make $5,000 less a year. And that's a big hit to your bank account if you think about it from the long term. And that's the kind of choices we tend to make as human beings. And that's one of the big reasons why people resist change. They focus on the short term. They don't think about the long-term impact of change, and they're very uncomfortable with the short-term effects of going through the change. So this is a big problem that all of you are facing. Now, one of the conversations I had here. Well, let me give actually an example from Ohio State. So when I was at Ohio State in 2012, there was a major retirement plan change. And it was pretty major, pretty huge. I got there in 2011, so it was a year after I got there, so spent some time there. And it was announced somewhat suddenly, without much communication about it. And the faculty and staff were kind of in an uproar. You had a number of prominent faculty leaving the institution, which was definitely not the intention. So Ohio State kind of got a bad black eye. There was really a problem for staff morale. And because the faculty and the staff didn't want to lose. They had their previous plan, and they were really afraid of what this would mean to them. And they didn't really have good communication to them about the situation. I was in the situation of one of the professors who was getting the communication. Let me tell you, it was not good. It was very complex, language, technical language that I couldn't really get through. I mean, I'm in the social sciences, I'm not in accounting. So that's with my background. So that was a problem, and that was a problem that happened at Ohio State when I was a faculty member. Now, I was talking to another person here who described what happened in her institution in 2010. There was a major, again, change to the retirement plan, 403B retirement plan, when the plans went from 300 options that faculty could choose to only 20 options. And a number of other big changes. I'm not going to go in depth into it. But it was basically pretty scary. It was pretty problematic. It was harrowing for faculty to face that. They were scared. But the communication there was much, much, much better. Both the volume and the frequency of communication was much more thorough. So that was something that got faculty on board with the change. Faculty were much more welcoming of that. And for a number of people who told me about experiences of change in their institution, they highlighted the importance of frequency and volume of communication as being pretty key to getting faculty and staff to accept short-term losses for the long-term gain of themselves and their institution. So that's really important, and it's something that's really rarely realized as a strategy to address change in institutions. There was an article in September 30th, 2014 on the main Coupa HR blog called "That Change Doesn't Have to Be So Scary," that talked about, hey, how about getting faculty involved in the change process and getting them part of the process. Now, that's a good strategy in its own way. However, it really, I have to tell you that the article was a bit misleading when it said change doesn't have to be scary. It will always be scary. So let me be very clear and specific. It will always be scary. What your goal is, your goal as HR professionals is to make faculty and staff more scared of not changing. So that is your goal. Get loss aversion working for you. Think about how can you frame the issue in such a way that the faculty and staff will lose more by not collaborating with a change, by not participating in the change in the long term. How will they lose more in the long term? So that's what you have to do. That's what you have to do. You have to get them on the coin flip side, not on the $45 cash side. Long-term repeating scenarios. So think about that aspect of things, and I want you to write that down. How might loss aversion be playing a role in your university, and how might you address it? So again, 30 seconds.